Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, just let's wait till open. Yes, here we have Galea too. That's fine. Good afternoon, Galea.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Well, you're here, then we can resume our lesson yesterday. We were looking at sort of the kind of alliances that you can have. Let's go back to the slide. Second, if it, okay. Just to resume, at the lowest level, we have this tactical alliance, which is interlining, which means simply the two airlines decide that when passengers want to buy a ticket going from A to C and passing through B, and the first airline does the route to A to B, and the second airline does the route from B to C, they can sell only one ticket, and then they share the revenue of the ticket. So that is a very simple way of, that is simply a very tactical alliance, and it concerns generally bilateral agreements between companies. When it comes to a more complex kind of agreements, then we find the notion, and this is the main element, we find code sharing. We've seen what we mean by code sharing in the sense that that flight is, although it's operated by one member of the alliance, it appears on the schedule of all the other members of the alliance, which can present that flight as their own. So this is much more complex because it shows that they're not two different airlines, but it's an airlines that are allied. And we've seen the One World, Star Alliance, and the third one, sorry, every now and then I forget, One World, Sky Team, and Star Alliance, the three alliances that we find in the world, and what is the kind of integration that these airlines have. Sometimes they go on to a further sort of agreement, goes beyond simple code sharing. We see that generally they have typically scheduling, the routes, the prices are agreed. So once we've said this, what are the issues? Obviously, we're trying to see to put alliances within the framework of Article 101 of the Treaty of on the Functioning of the European Union. And so what are the benefits? Why do airlines reach these alliances? Here we have simply the list of these reasons. First of all, global alliances allow airlines to link their networks of routes and sell tickets on the flights of their commercial partners, thereby offering travelers access to hundreds of destinations around the world on a single virtual network. Let's go back a second just to show you one. Let's see. Here we have Aegean Airlines. Aegean Airlines is a Greek airline that serves, well, a certain amount of destinations in Europe, but surely doesn't go beyond Europe. Instead, what can Aegean Airlines do? Any Greek passenger that goes on the website of Aegean Airlines can buy a ticket to Canada or to New Zealand or to South Africa or to Singapore. Just to show you, I mean, you are a small airline and you can reach to the whole world without having to establish your own company there, without having to put your own planes, your own pilots and all the rest there. You simply use other allied airlines to transport your passengers from your destination. Let's imagine you want to go from, the passenger wants to go from Athens to Singapore. So there's an agreement between, in this alliance, the passenger of Aegean buys a ticket to Singapore, well, from Athens goes to a place where Singapore Airlines arrives and then moves on to Singapore. So this shows you the significant advantage that they have. So a carrier can also benefit from the wide recognition of the global alliance brand. So there's also an issue of brands to the extent in which passengers sort of look at a certain brand rather than a different brand. They obviously look after the richest segment of their clients, which are corporate customers, those that travel in business or first class. So clearly, if you offer a very broad range of services, obviously business class, businessmen, and people who have lots of money, well, they tend to to follow you. And obviously this has the great advantage that you can open up new routes. You say, hey, listen, there's a new route. Why don't we share and get together to open up this new route and we bring our passengers together. We join all our passengers towards this new route instead of giving passengers to another company. So you see, there are lots of very good reasons for alliances. Interlining, I've already mentioned what interlining is. It is ability of one carrier to sell a journey or part of a journey on the services of another carrier, together with the procedures for settlement of revenue owed to the carrying airline and payment of the interline service charge to the ticketing carrier in recognition of the cost for the sale incurred. So this gives them the possibility to sell a ticket on another airline on a route that they do not serve, and so the passenger buys only a single ticket. You could ask yourself, what are the advantages of buying a single ticket instead of two different tickets? Well, first of all, you have only one procedure, and you do only one procedure for buying that ticket. The second element is that when you are on the same ticket, the other flight is considered a connecting flight, and as we shall see in the last module of the course, passengers are protected in the sense that if you have a ticket which has two routes from A to B and from B to C, and you arrive in B because late and you've lost the connecting flight to C, you will be protected in the sense that you will be put on, you haven't lost your flight, but you will simply, you will be able to take the immediate next flight, and therefore you have not lost your money. So interlining has also some significant advantages for passengers. If you had two different tickets, the second company could say, sorry very much, you arrived late. I don't care where you came from. Sorry, you could have come from anywhere, but you are late. You presented yourself late at the check-in, and therefore I can't board you, and you've lost your ticket. So just to point out that interlining has some significant advantages also for passengers, not only for the airlines. Second element, we know, I suppose you know what frequent flyer programs are. They're somehow fidelity programs. They sort of tend to incentivize the use of a certain airline in exchange for certain benefits. The more you fly, the more benefits you obtain. You can have a free trip, and you can have or access to a business lounge, and so clearly, if there's an alliance, well, if you are, typical example, you're taking an Alitalia flight, and then you take a Air France flight, and then you take a KLM or a Delta flight, all the points you make with your frequent flyer program all join together. It isn't if they were different airlines. So this also is an incentive, especially for corporate business passengers. Clearly, these frequent flyer programs are fidelity programs that you find anywhere. Just go to the supermarket. If you go to the supermarket, always the same supermarket, probably you will be given some a card, a fidelity card that says, and they stamp it each time you go there, and the more you spend, then at the end you can have some kind of prize, or you can have a discount on what you buy. So it is a typical procedure of a fidelity program in which you try to keep your client and avoid that the client goes to another company. Code sharing, we've already seen this, simply allows for a flight operated by one carrier called the operating carrier, which will offer the flight for sale under its own code, to be marketed by another carrier under that other carrier's code and flight number. That is the marketing carrier. So just to point out that this is, so the carrier that issues tickets to the passenger for a journey involving a code share flight is known as the ticketing carrier, where the complete journey does not involve a third carrier. The ticketing carrier will generally be the same as the marketing carrier. Clearly, if there are more companies involved, you're taking a sort of a flight from Rome to Martinique in the Caribbean, passing through Paris, well, then you will see that although the second flight could be hypothetically indicated as an AZ, an Alitalia flight, well, it is an AF, Air France flight. So what are the main forms of code sharing? A parallel operation on a trunk route. Trunk route is when it is truncated, when it is, there's Rome, Paris, Paris, Rome. Two carriers both operate the same sector, Alitalia and Air France, and each gives its code to the other's operated flight. Flights between Paris and Milan, operated by Air France and Alitalia, which have each other's codes as well as their own. So that is very simple. It's a trunk line, and so it is Rome, Paris, Paris, Rome, and that's the end of the route. Instead, the unilateral operation on a trunk route, a carrier puts its code on a sector operated by another carrier, but not by itself. And so just imagine that the example I made, Alitalia puts its code on a flight to the Caribbean, which is operated by Air France. It does not have, there are no Alitalia flights that go to the Caribbean, but it puts its AZ code on an AF Air France flight. For example, British Airways puts its code on a Manchester-Chicago operated by American Airlines. Delta puts its code on a Paris-Boston operated by Air France. So these are sometimes known as network extension code shares. So you are extending your network. So you don't really fly directly to that destination, but you use an allied company code, their flight, and you put your code on that flight. Or behind and beyond route connecting to a trunk route service. Just imagine the trip from sort of Paris, Rome, and you're coming from a distant destination, coming from the US, and the US is, the flight is a Delta flight. It goes from Boston to Paris, and then beyond it goes to Rome. So a carrier puts its code on sectors operated by another carrier. So Alitalia puts its code AZ on a Delta flight to provide connections with its own operated services. So Alitalia sells a ticket, Boston, Paris, Rome, and the first segment, Boston, Paris, which is not operated by Alitalia, but is operated by Delta, that flight has an AZ code. So this is the various forms of code sharing. Now, clearly, we've seen all the advantages of code sharing, and especially, and also consider the problem of if you wanted to offer yourself this route, this service, it would be very expensive and might be also risky. So you are not entering a certain market because you know it is risky. Now, what are the main, well, we've seen this is code share agreements, specification of routes covered by the agreement, provisions allowing each carrier to market a flight under its own code, minimum level of operational ground and in-flight service to be provided by each carrier, safety and security provisions, provisions for handling passengers and disruption events, mapping of reservation booking classes, provisions on prices, revenue management, because obviously you must share the revenue, ticketing, taxes, obviously airport taxes. Now, what is the problem under Article 101? The main issue is that it is an agreement between two companies, and it is clearly a limitation of competition, especially when it comes to overlapping routes. It is a limitation to competition because you are reducing competition on that route. When two companies agree to provide common services on that route, and maybe they are dominant on that route, imagine Alitalia and Air France on the Rome-Paris segment, clearly the concerns under Article 101 are very clear. And at the same time, when you in non-overlapping routes, you're simply saying, listen, I'm not going to compete with you. Listen, I might compete with you, but as I find it too risky to compete with you, opening up a route, a certain route, let's find an agreement, and I won't do my own flights on that certain route, and I will use your flights. So you see, in this second case, when the routes are not overlapping, there's some kind of reduction of competition. Someone says, I'm not going to compete with you. While in the first case of overlapping route, it is typically an agreement to somehow reduce specifically competition on that route where both companies are operating. So the question is, are these alliances allowed? The European Commission the EU Commission has said yes, if, and we must see what are these reasons. The first, these principles are set out in paragraph 3 of Article 101. So we have these 4 conditions: improving the production and distribution of goods or promote technical or economic progress. And we shall see that this has, obviously, it surely improves the activity. It reduces the cost of the service. And when you expand your network, clearly that is an economic progress. You are expanding your network, and you can fly from Athens to Singapore with one ticket, only one ticket. Maybe you have to do one. Surely have to do one connecting flight, but it is much more convenient than having to do 2 different tickets, 2 different segments. Second, consumers must receive a fair share of resulting benefits. And so the argument is, well, if there is an agreement and we reduce operating cost, well, this means that the tickets should cost less. Secondly, consumers are given much more choice in deciding when they want to fly. In the Rome-Paris example that I've made before, the fact is that instead of having 4 Alitalia flights and then separately 4 Air France flights, the passenger goes on the website and finds 8 flights that are scheduled, and therefore has much more choice and can organize his or her trip much more conveniently, so that you see this is a significant advantage. The restrictions must be indispensable for the attainment of these objectives, and these code-sharing agreements are clearly indispensable, because you must present as your own flight somebody else's flight, and then, and this is a significant limitation that we must examine carefully, these agreements must not afford the parties the possibility of eliminating competition. So if you do an agreement And the result of this agreement is that there's no competition because you have sort of the majority of the flights on a certain route, you cover them. Well, then the Commission will say, no, I will not allow you to have this kind of agreement because you are substantially eliminating or reducing significantly the possibility for other companies to compete with you. So we shall see this last element, this main concern of the Commission. The Commission says, yes, okay, it improves distribution of these services, the network, there is an advantage for consumers, clearly it is indispensable, but what about competitors? Shall we have a look at what are the effects of alliance on competition on a certain market? And just remember, I repeat it once more, that in transport, in air transport, the relevant market is a route. This route could be from one airport to another, but it could be also from one town which has several airports to another town which has several airports. So it's also this element that must be considered. The alliance should achieve cost efficiencies and qualitative efficiencies, no doubt about that. It reduces the cost, it should reduce the cost of the tickets, and quality, well, you pass immediately to another airline as if it were your own. You have, you are somehow protected in case of disruption. And so this is clearly an advantage. What is, and let's look at the last bullet point, each origin destination route where appreciable restrictions of competition have been identified must be examined, taking into account mainly two elements. Actual competition, so who is operating on that route? So what are the effects of the alliance on that specific route, and potential competition? Does this alliance create an entry barrier because you're so strong that nobody's going to compete with you, saying, hey, but listen, Alitalia and Air France are covering all the Rome-Paris segment. Well, I'm not going to enter that. They're too strong for me. I can't beat them. So it becomes an entry barrier, because if someone has 8 flights a day, one direction and the other direction, well, one say that has exhausted all the demand of travel from Rome to Paris and vice versa. So there's no convenience for me to enter that specific market. Let's this is just to point out that from a procedural point of view, first, until 2004, alliances had to be presented to the Commission for approval. Now they must sort of when there is an alliance, the carriers must instead conduct an assessment whether their cooperation is in breach of EU competition rules, and only if someone complains, and this is not uncommon, someone complains that this alliance restricts competition, well, if someone complains, then the Commission or the national competition authority will intervene and verify if actually the alliance can be exonerated under Article 101, paragraph 3. Finally, and we should see this specifically, when this last point is verified, this just to point out, this last bullet point, when they may be, the alliance may have some negative effects for competition, both actual and potential competition, well, the Commission can impose so-called commitments. So it says, well, I will agree, I will allow this alliance, but you must take certain commitments, and we shall see specifically what these commitments are. But substantially, the companies must reduce their activity on certain routes to allow other competitors to enter the market, to remain or enter the market. And we shall see this in a moment. Now, block exemptions, just let me see. Okay. So I think at this point, as we've substantially introduced the issue, I would ask Asayag to do his presentation.
Can you hear me?
I can. Do we? Okay, go ahead, Asayag. You must.
Yes.
Screen.
Wait, because I must.
Yes, you must put
your. Share, yeah. So I must.
You must be on the desktop, and then you press. Yes, here we are. I see something here. Now this is Microsoft Teams. Okay, that's fine. What you must do is put it full screen. Okay.
Okay.
This is not the European, just Asayag, as we mentioned yesterday, this is not a decision by the European Court of Justice. This is the decision by the European Commission. So the source of the decision is, and you put European Court of Justice on top.
Isn't it the European?
Case, sorry very much. If you look at the case, you see very clearly.
Isn't it the European Court of Justice which observed if the Commission has done everything?
Yeah, sorry, yes, you're quite right. Sorry, it's yes. Okay.
Okay. So this case is about this decision concerns a transatlantic joint venture agreement. So I will refer to it as TAGV. There are numerous parties. There are each airlines. So first party is Air France, registered in France. Its main business is passenger air transport, and its principal hub for international operation is at Paris-Charles de Gaulle Airport, France, or Paris-Orly Airport. Then there is a KLM, registered in the Netherlands. It's also an airlines company, and its principal hub is at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands. Then there is Alitalia, registered in Italy, also an airlines company airline, and its hub is at Leonardo da Vinci Airport, Fiumicino, Milan Malpensa. Then there is Delta, registered in the US. It's a US-based airlines, and two of its main hubs are at New York LaGuardia and New York John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport. And there is also SkyTeam Alliance of Airlines. It's an alliance of multiple airlines. So the procedural history in this case, start on 23 of January 2012, when the Commission opened proceedings with a view to adopting a decision in relation to the TAGV agreement. Then on the 26th of September 2014, the Commission adopted the preliminary assessment, which set out the Commission's competition concerns. There's concerns related to the compatibility of the TAGV agreement with Article 101 of the Treaty of the Functioning Europe, in particular as regards the routes of concern, which we will see later. On 23 of October 2014, a notice was published summarizing the case and the initial commitment and inviting interested third observation on the initial commitments within 1 month. And then on the 8th December 2014, the Commission provided the parties with non-confidential versions of the observations made by interested third commitments, and the parties submitted a signed version of the amended commitments called the final commitments, which we will see at the end. And finally, on the 30 April of 2015, the hearing officer issued his final report. So the nature of the dispute is quite simple. It concerns a transatlantic joint venture agreement, as I already said, between Air France, Alitalia, Delta, and KLM. So these agreements deal with the establishment of a profit-loss sharing joint venture, which covers all passenger transport services operated by the parties on routes between Europe and North America. So the transatlantic routes, that's why. Furthermore, the agreement provides for an extensive cooperation between the parties, including on pricing, capacity, scheduling, and revenue management coordination. But the issue is that the TAGV does not conduct its business autonomously and is directly managed by the parent undertakings. So it doesn't qualify as a full function joint venture, and so is subject to Article 101 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Thereby, this article provides that all agreements between undertakings decisions by association of undertakings and concerted practice which may affect trades between member states and which have their object or effect the prevention, restriction, or distortion of competition within the internal market and shall be seen as incompatible with the internal market. So we know that the TAGV agreements provides for extensive cooperation between the parties in relation to all key parameters of airlines competition, so price, capacity, scheduling, and quality of service in general. So it's not the question, but it's a preliminary question. So we could ask ourselves that if the TAGV agreement eliminates competition between the parties on these key parameters, and given this element, the Commission took the preliminary view that the agreement is by its very nature harmful to the proper functioning of normal competition, and therefore are the object of restricting competition. And furthermore, the TAGV agreements incites each party to focus on the common interest of all the parties at the expense of its individual incentives on the market. So it conflicts with the concept of all relating to competition, as the parties substitute cooperation for competition between them. So in its preliminary view, the ACG states that the TAGV is incompatible with the internal EU market. So in this case, the Commission states a few relevant points. The first is that they state that the relevant market for scheduled air passenger air transport services on the basis of the point of destination, point of origin city pair approach, like we see yesterday. And the Commission stated for that case that it considered a distinction between premium and non-premium markets. It's relevant in this case. On the contrary, it's not relevant it wasn't necessary to conclude whether one-stop flights were in the same market as non-stop flights. It didn't differ in the market. It didn't change anything for this case, non-stop and one-stop flight. So the Commission also assessed that airport substitutability in terms of demand side and supply side. And in this case, the airports of Newark Liberty and New York JFK Airport are substitutable, and same for the Charles de Gaulle Airport and Orly Airports of Paris. Then the Commission goes to the issue, the main issue, and that is that the TAGV agreement which is basically created to provide for extensive cooperation between the parties in relation to all key parameters of airline, could be harmful to the proper functioning moral competition and as the object of restricting competition. To pursue its assessment, Commission analyzed this restriction of competition route by route, so for the three routes concerned by the TAGV. So Paris, New York, Amsterdam, New York, Rome, New York. So for the Paris, New York route, the Commission first that before the creation of the agreement, Air France and Delta would each be operating non-stop flight on the Paris-New York route independently and would therefore be actual non-stop competitors, so real competitors. But after the implementation of the agreement, the parties acknowledged that in the absence of the TAGV agreement, Delta would operate one or two non-stop daily frequencies on the Paris-New York route. So the main issue was, from the point of view of the Commission, was basically the loss of competition between the parties. So we can see very easily that the TAGV agreement's parameters make that all the parties no longer face competition from each other. So yes, in its preliminary assessment, the Commission stated that the TAGV agreement constituted a restriction by object and was likely to have anti-competitive effects for premium passenger on the Paris-New York route. Also, the Commission considered that this route was a hub-to-hub route with significant barriers to entry and expansion for new competitors, especially at certain time of the day, like on the morning, in the afternoon. It is very complicated to have a slot. Then there is also the unique, like I said, the unique ability to shuffle their slot to provide optimal timings for the Paris-New York flight. They have a way much larger slot choice than any other airline. And finally, the parties also had an advantage because they could operate hubs, airport at both ends of the Paris-New York, in contrary to any new entrant or smaller competitor who would want to expand operations on the route. So the Commission considered this as a substantial barrier to entry and expansion for competitors. So in conclusion, the Commission concluded that the TAGV agreement had a purely anti-competitive object and restricted competition on this route, Paris-New York route, and the competition which would have existed between Air France and Delta would be eliminated and could be replaced by third-party airlines because of the barriers previously mentioned to entry and expand on the market. Just 1 second, do you see the whole screen?
Yes, I see the screen. Yes, I see the whole slide. Yes.
Okay. So the Commission carried out the same kind of assessment for the Amsterdam-New York route and the Rome-New York route. So we can go on more briefly. Once again, the Commission concluded in its preliminary assessment that the TAGV agreement constituted once again a restriction by object and was likely to have anti-competitive effects in the sense that the parties' cooperation is basically eliminated on all key parameters. So the Commission found that the Amsterdam-New York route was a hub-to-hub route for the party, also, yes, with significant barriers to entry, once again. Same problem than the previous route. Parties and their alliance have way much larger slot portfolio at Amsterdam Schiphol than any other airlines. And thus they have a unique ability to reshuffle their slots here too. Also, the hub presence at both ends of the route, like the previous route. Like in this case, they could draw significant number of passengers away from the parties, and they had 4 times daily service, and that so the competitors would suffer the permanent disadvantage, which constitute a significant barrier. So the Commission arrived to the same conclusion. The competition which would have existed between KLM and Delta has been eliminated and won't be replaced by competition from third parties. So same conclusion with Rome-New York route, hub-to-hub route. Once again, there are significant barriers to entry and expansion for competitors and new entrants. Hub-to-hub routes, the parties still have the largest portfolio at Rome, Fiumicino, and they have the frequency advantage, which constitute once again a significant barrier to expansion for a newcomer, of course. Then the Commission arrived to the same preliminary view as before. The TAG agreement are still anti-competitive object. So after all this assessment and observation, the Court of the European Union held that to find if an agreement or practice may affect trade between member states, it must be possible to foresee with a sufficient degree of probability that it may influence the pattern of trade between member states. So in this case, we can easily see that the TAGV agreement alters the manner in which the parties will provide their transatlantic and intra-European Union services if there was no agreement, completely distort what the competition would be in general. So the TAGV agreement affect trade between member states within the meaning of the Article 101 of the treaty. So that's the important thing. And the parties didn't provide for the exception to the Article 101 of the treaty, like at paragraph 3, but it provides exception for this article, but the parties are not did not state any arguments concerning this exception, so no justification in a way. So we could ask ourselves, the question we could ask ourselves about this case is, under which condition does the TAGV agreement doesn't restrict competition? And after the preliminary review from the Commission, also, which was also called a market test notice, the Commission assessed that the final commitment, including the answer from the parties to the preliminary review, so the parties were willing to negotiate in a way. So this final commitment included the new condition for the TAGV agreement to be implemented and functional. And I could say that the parties were open to make some efforts. We're just going to see it right now. They proposed a lot of, they proposed to make slots available at Amsterdam Airport and Rome Airport, and allowing up to 7 new or additional frequencies weekly. And this slot release commitment enable a potential competitor to enter the route or existing competitors to expand their services with additional competitively timed frequencies. And thus, this flexibility on slots commitment offer more attractive and available opportunities to airlines with different business strategies and airport preference. Then, regarding the fact that there is no slot release on Paris-New York route. So because the parties answered that the competitors operated already more frequencies per day than the parties. So there is actually no justification for slot commitment on this route. So in this case, the TAGV agreement could be effective regarding the slots release. But there is there are more offers from the parties. So there is no slot release on Paris-New York route, but the parties offered to conclude fair combinability agreements with competitors. And indeed, this ability to offer the combined frequencies and schedules of the parties in one direction and their own frequencies and schedule in the other direction should mitigate the frequency disadvantage of the competitors. And thus, this will allow competitors to offer higher frequency service with better schedules to keep up the competition with the parties. And the Commission considered on this basis that the fair combinability commitment was adequate and sufficient and to encourage competitors to take it up. Yeah, and because it lowered the barriers to entry on the routes. Also, the parties offered to conclude special pro-rate agreements commitment with the competitors on up to 20 feeder routes operated by the relevant parties. So it would also reduce the barriers and expand the route of concern. And here it was Israel and Lebanon. They also proposed to offer to allow certain competitors to be hosted in the party's frequent flyer program, but only for under certain specific condition. But it's already a good offer because it strengthens the attractiveness of the competitor services. And the parties also proposed to provide detailed data to the Commission of their activities in order to monitor their cooperation with the TAGV agreement, final commitment. And finally, the parties also proposed a review clause to enable the Commission to assess how the market has evolved in the light of the final commitments after 5 years. So 5 years from the date of adoption of the decisions. So they could review the final commitments. And finally, it's the European Court of Justice, which assess if either the principle of proportionality is respected in the final agreement, that all the measures adopted by the Commission are found suitable to the case and do not exceed what is appropriate and necessary for attaining the objective pursued. Everything is proposed for a reason and isn't excessive. So in this case, the final commitments are sufficient to address the concerns notified in the preliminary assessment. So no more worries for the competitors. So to sum up briefly, so yes, it respects the principle of proportionality. And to sum up, so to balance the preliminary view, with the final commitment, so there is a slot release from the parties on Amsterdam, New York and Rome, New York routes. From the Paris, New York route, the Commission considered that the special pro-rate agreement was an adequate remedy. And the parties also agreed to extend the geographical scope of the special pro-rate agreement commitment in order to cover 2 further significant destinations. So to conclude, the European Court of Justice decided that this decision of the Commission complied accordingly with the principle of proportionality. And in the light of the final commitments offered by the parties, the Commission considered that there are no longer grounds for action on its part, and the proceeding in this case should therefore be brought to an end. And the ACG decided that the final commitment shall be binding for the parties for a period of 10 years from the date of adoption of the decision.
Okay, Asayag, yes, you can return to the full screen. Okay, I just wanted to ask you, why is the issue of hub-to-hub considered so important?
Hub-to-hub, because not every airport benefits from this. So it's a disadvantage for other competitors?
Now, the issue is this, because if you have a hub, you just remember how the notion of hub is. There's a hub and spoke. So you have a hub and all your passengers come from surrounding origins, points of origin, and they arrive in the hub. And there they find a connecting flight. So what happens? The hub is the place where all your passengers convene, and then you redistribute them to other destinations. So this means that you're very strong in that hub. Charles de Gaulle is very strong, as JFK is very Charles de Gaulle for Air France, or Schiphol or Fiumicino are very strong for Air France, KLM, or Alitalia. And JFK is very strong for Delta. So when you have a hub and the routes are between 2 hubs, each of the airlines can take advantage of all the passengers that arrive there, while other companies that do not have a hub there clearly they cannot take advantage. They don't have so many passengers. Can you explain better this notion of pro-rate agreement? Because I mean, it is specified in the decision. But can you please explain for your colleagues what do we mean by a pro-rate agreement? What is the content of this agreement?
Yes.
You're mute.
I struggle a bit to understand the concept, but it's like basically it's advantage given for a certain case, advantage given for a specific situation. Like the parties accepted to give a certain advantage to the competitors under certain conditions.
The pro-rate agreement is quite simple. This is why I put the question on the hub before. So I'm Air France. My hub is Charles de Gaulle. So all my passengers, whether they are coming from domestic destined origins or other European origins, they all arrive in Paris, Charles de Gaulle, and then can go across the Atlantic and go to New York. And so I have this advantage. My competitors who do not have a hub in Paris, surely they do not have this advantage, and therefore they have a limitation when they want to go. They have passengers that want to continue on a transatlantic flight. So on the basis of this agreement, what are you saying? That airlines, certain airlines, that obviously are not members of the alliance, because if you're a member of the alliance, it's no problem. You just sell that Paris, New York as your own. So it's not a problem. But just imagine there's some, let's say, Alitalia, Air France, KLM, and Delta are members of the, today I just I don't remember the name. It's not Star Alliance, it's not One World, it's SkyTeam. So they're members of SkyTeam Alliance. So any member of the SkyTeam Alliance can obviously do this code sharing. But let's imagine there's an airline that is not a member of SkyTeam, therefore cannot take advantage. Let's take Aegean. Aegean is a member of Star Alliance. So, and Aegean is a Greek company and is flying from Athens to Paris. It has a hub in Athens, but does not have a hub in Paris. So what are you saying? You're saying, listen, if your passengers fly from Athens to Paris, we will give them the opportunity to fly on this flight, to take this flight from Paris to New York, as if it were your flight, somehow a limited code sharing. So if you bring passengers to Paris, if you, Aegean, take passengers to Paris, I will give you benefits, which are benefits also to your passengers, in the sense that, first of all, generally you will have a reduction of fares, because you're not selling two different tickets with two different fares. You're selling one fare, Athens, New York, and then we will prorate. That is, we will divide, we will share the total price of the ticket. So I'm giving you an advantage. So you can use, although we do not belong to the same alliance, if you come to Paris and then your passenger wants to go on to New York, we will consider him as a part of our alliance. So prices go down. And obviously, if it is a business passenger, this business passenger will have significant advantages with sort of access to the business lounge and so on. So just to point out, this is this gives sort of reduces the strength, the exclusionary power of the company that holds the hub towards other airlines that therefore Aegean has to fly to a certain somewhere else in that alliance. There's Lufthansa would have to go fly to Frankfurt to take advantage of a transatlantic flight. So you have to go from Athens to Frankfurt, and then from Frankfurt you have to go to New York. While in this system, you can choose if you want to go to Frankfurt and take a connecting flight from Frankfurt to New York, or you can go to Paris. Maybe you find out that if you go via Paris, you find a much more convenient connection. This is the point. I mean, obviously, the Aegean passenger who has an allied, very big, strong company, which is Lufthansa, can take a direct, take a ticket, buy a ticket, Athens, New York, via Frankfurt. But maybe in Frankfurt has to wait for 3 hours, 4 hours before that flight leaves for New York. Instead, if you go via Paris, you find Air France or Delta flights that you, instead of waiting 4 hours, you can wait only 2 hours. So you have an advantage in flying to Paris rather than flying to Frankfurt. Clearly, if they are two distinct, and they are distinct airlines which do their different pricing strategies, clearly there's no convenience, because the passenger has no convenience of taking an Air France airplane, because has to pay the whole twice the ticket. It costs much more. While if you have one ticket, one fare, Athens, New York via Paris, on the basis of the prorate agreement, price goes down, and therefore can be convenient for the passenger. This is the reason of the prorate. You're saying that if you arrive in the hub, well, you will be considered, not everybody, but many companies that arrive in the hub will be considered as part of the network, and therefore can have reduced prices. The second element, which is also important to consider, is that when it says frequent flying programs, this is one of the main elements of an alliance. That is that if I'm Aegean and I go on Air France or any other airline of that alliance, well, on Lufthansa, sorry, or on any other airline of that alliance, well, the points I make all go together. If I take a different airline, obviously I do not take points, I do not obtain points. So what is the commitment says? What does this commitment say? It says that you are an Aegean passenger, you are flying Athens to Paris, and that's fine, you get your points. And then you're taking Air France, which is not part of that alliance, because your alliance is Star Alliance, it's not SkyTeam. I'm saying that the points you make flying from Paris to New York, they will be yours. So you don't have to open up a new fidelity program. So this also is an advantage, especially for business travelers who travel a lot and have fringe benefits from traveling a lot and traveling on the same network. So thank you, Asayag. Now let's go on a little bit more. Sorry, just let me open up.
Can I just go to the bathroom really quickly?
Yes. So I'm changing. In the meantime, I'm changing my slides so we can.
Thanks.
Okay, now we were, as I've mentioned several times, remember always that competition and state aid are two faces of the same coin, and therefore we have to always analyze them together. Now, what we're going to do, we've seen some issues concerning competition in the case of alliances. Then maybe we'll have a case which concerns mergers, which is also an interesting aspect when two airlines merge, and if the merger has negative effects for competition. What are we interested now in is state aid. And here in the first slide is presenting what is a typical feature of the European economies, which are mixed economies. In Europe, tell the truth, also in the US, it isn't completely full competition. But anyhow, let's look at Europe. It is a mixed economic system. It is common for the state to play some role in the marketplace. And this role is very varied. It's always, the state has always, since states have existed, it always plays a role. Just please remember differences between services of general interest and services of general economic interest. Services of general interest, such as the army, armed forces, police, schools, hospitals, well, those are considered services of general interest. And then we find services of general economic interest. In many cases, these services of general economic interest are run by the state or by some public entity, some local authority. Just think of electricity, think of energy, other energy sources, think of local transport. Those are typical examples of services of general economic interest which are run by the state or by a state or publicly owned company. So surely this role has diminished in the sense that we know that competition is one of the main drivers of the European economy. The Rome Treaty 1957 and its subsequent modifications have always kept at its center the notion of competition as the economic theory which optimizes a whole lot of factors, economic factors, encourages reduction of prices, consumer satisfaction, qualification, innovation, and so on. So we've seen what the advantages are. So but at the same time, we see that the state has not completely retreated from economic activity and intervenes variously at various levels. So what do we have? The state has moved out in many cases, but they are undertakings which are under state public ownership or have a privileged status in the marketplace. Public ownership, just think of in the transport, just think of Air France and Lufthansa, which are owned by France, government, France, and Germany. That's a typical example. Or enterprises which have a privileged status in the marketplace. Just let's think of airports which are held by a public entity and which are in a monopolistic position. They are, when you have a port or an airport or a station, well, you are the only entity which owns that, which can control that facility, that specific facility. So we've already seen differences between services of general interest and services of general economic interest. And distinguishing general interest, generally there, we don't pay directly for the army, for the armed forces, for the police, or for schools and for hospitals, we pay indirectly through taxpayers. But if you do not pay taxes because you do not have an income, clearly you do not, you receive this service, which is of general interest, but you don't have to pay for it. While we know that if we want electricity, if we want transport, well, we pay for it. Or there may be some kinds of limitations of the price, but we have to pay. If we don't pay the ticket, nobody can board the public transport without paying a ticket. There are some interesting examples starting from this year, I think, in Luxembourg, local transport, in the town of Luxembourg, local transport is free. You don't have to pay any ticket, which is interesting case. So they said, well, why, let's make it free. So we encourage people to board the bus, and we'll get some other form of another form of financing public transport. But generally speaking, we have, you just think of a bus or a train, you need a ticket. It can be a reduced ticket because you are a student, it can be a reduced ticket because you're an old age pensioner, but you pay something, you must pay for that service, not through your taxes. So just to point out the difference between services of general interest and services of general economic interest. Now, problem is, on the one hand, the issue of Article 106, we've seen services of general economic interest, and this brings us to the issue of state-owned enterprises and or companies that hold exclusive rights, and Article 107, which is state aid. Just to repeat something, remember public services and universal service. Public service are services whose delivery is generally considered to be in the public interest and may be regulated and financed by the state. So public service, well, many services are considered of public interest, but if you think of a service, a restaurant, well, should a restaurant is, well, we like to go to a restaurant, we enjoy eating good food, but I mean, we would not say that that is a public service. We would say that is a service, but not a public service. So just to point out that we find several services which are simply in the have a private interest, but not a public, not a public service. And when the public service is especially required, public service obligations may be imposed. And that requires compensation for these services. So you have an obligation to provide services according to a certain standards and a certain agreement, and you receive compensation for that, for the service you're providing. Universal service, as I've already mentioned several times, is an obligation of a supplier of goods or services to provide them at an affordable cost and guaranteed quality to all who require them. So I've mentioned several times the postal service in Great Britain at the mid of the 19th century, offered to everybody, letterboxes everywhere. You buy a stamp, and the price of the stamp for a letter is the same wherever you are in Great Britain, and you find that the service does not make any discrimination whether you live in the town or live in the country. The service is exactly the same. Now, obviously, now we find nobody uses, very few people use postal service, but just think of the sort of internet connectivity to the telecommunication network. That is a typical universal service. The company must, it could be France Telecom in France or Telecom Italia in Italy, has to provide connectivity, the same minimum connectivity wherever you are in Italy. You just can't say, or in France, You can't say, as you live in the mountains, well, sorry very much, no connectivity, costs too much to bring the cable network up there. No, you must provide universal service connectivity. And the same thing comes for transport. Obviously, one has to look at the network, but public transport is a typical universal service. You live in a town, and buses must connect not only places which are very populated, where there's lots of people who live there, but also peripheral areas which have few population, few people living there, but these people need to, students, workers need to get to school, to work, and therefore they need universal service. So in the transport sector, air transport sector, let's look at services of general economic interest. So first of all, we have seen that they can be public service obligations can be imposed on a specific route or group of routes and not on any generic route. So transport is a service, but in many cases it is simply a for-profit service where companies are competing. Just let's imagine the route from Rome, London, Rome, Frankfurt, Frankfurt, Madrid. Well, they're in competition. There are companies which provide these services, and so there's no reason for public service obligation. Public service obligations can only be imposed on a route to fulfill transport needs which cannot be adequately met by an existing air route or by other means of transport, typically distant islands. And further element, when it comes with this, so we are looking, this first point, we were looking at transport, so airlines providing service from one point to another. Now let's look at airports. That is the infrastructure that is required for air transport. There's no air transport if there's no airport. It isn't that you can stay in the air. You need an airport to land and to take off. So in some cases, the management of an airport may be considered a service of general economic interest. Typically, if without that airport, that part of think of an island, that island could be, or that part of the country would be isolated from the rest of the country. You find we've seen in the Portuguese landing charges case, we've seen the outmost islands of the Azores. So that is a typical case in which you need airports, and those airports are services of general economic interest. When we come to services of general economic interest, well, then we see that there is quite often there are financial commitments by the member states. Member states feel that this service is of a general economic interest, and therefore they put money in it. The Commission controls these the financial decisions that the member states or their local authorities take towards services of general economic interest in the transport sector, and they have set out a whole lot of rules, which we shall analyze. This gives you just this slide, but then I will send it to you, gives you the list of the pieces of legislation which set the rules. What we are interested in mostly is, if you look at mostly on the third bullet point, communication on framework for state aid in the form of public service compensation. So just remember, when you have public service obligations, you must decide, you must have there are some criteria for the compensation that must be granted. And we shall see a specific, very important decision by the European Court of Justice in this field. Let's look at some basic principles, because these are repeatedly used in the transport sector. So Article 14 of the Treaty on the Functioning says, without prejudice to what is established and what we are interested in, Article 106 and 107 of this treaty, and given the place occupied by services of general economic interest in the shared values of the Union, as well as their role in promoting social and territorial cohesion. Just remember, this was already way back in the Rome Treaty. It was established that transport ensures social and territorial cohesion. If you live on an island and you have no way of, you can only take a ferry boat, it takes you a whole day to reach the mainland, maybe 2 days to reach the mainland, clearly, well, there's very little social and territorial cohesion. I mean, it is very difficult for you to, it takes a lot of time, and therefore you're isolated. The islands, and there are lots of islands in the European Union, all around in the Mediterranean Sea, in the North Sea, in the Atlantic, which are very distant from the mainland, and so you must ensure territorial cohesion. The Union, each within, and the member states shall take care that such services operate on the basis of principles and conditions, particularly economic and financial conditions which enable them to fulfill their missions. So this is the first element. They must be enabled, services of general economic interest must be enabled to fulfill their mission. So the mission is social and territorial cohesion. So this is already setting an exception to the general principles of which are set in Articles 106 and 107 that we have seen, exclusive rights, special or exclusive rights, or state aid. So it's just saying, well, listen, that's fine, competition, no interference of the state in free competition between undertakings, but when it comes to services of general economic interest, we have significant exceptions. We've somehow seen these already at the beginning. Article 106, in the case of public undertakings to which the member states grant special or exclusive rights, member states shall not enact or maintain in force any measure contrary to the rules set out in Articles 101 to 109 on competition. But paragraph 2, that is the main principle, paragraph 2 immediately sets the exception. Undertakings entrusted with operation of services of general economic interest or having a character of revenue producing monopoly shall be subject to the rules in the treaties, in particular to the rules on competition, insofar as the application of such rules does not obstruct the performance in law or in fact of the particular task assigned to them. So it's saying you must apply Articles 101, 102, and 107. Okay, that's fine, but when you apply them, this application must not obstruct the performance in law or in fact, which is interesting. It's not only according to law, but also de facto, factually, the task assigned to them. So this shows you already we're setting out in Article 106, we're setting out an exception for services of general economic interest. And paragraph 3, well, the Commission shall ensure application of the provision. So Commission has very strong power in this field. Now, let's look instead at state aid. So in this case, it's saying services of general economic interest, well, we shall apply competition rules to the extent that these competition rules do not prevent the performance of the tasks that have been given to these services of general economic interest. So this is the first one. Second point, state aid, Article 107. So usual structure. General principle, which is prohibition. Second paragraph, exceptions. Third paragraph, further exceptions, or rather more exceptions to the exceptions. So first, general principle. Any aid granted by a member state or through state resources in any form whatsoever which distorts or threatens to distort competition by favoring certain undertakings or the production of certain goods shall, insofar it affects the trade between member states, be incompatible with the internal market. So general prohibition, just remember the structure of paragraph 1 of Article 101. Any agreement, decision, concerted practice is not allowed. Okay, so here we have a general principle. So any state aid, any aid granted by the state or any through state resources which distorts competition is not allowed. However, we see immediately paragraph 2 sets out an exception. Following shall be compatible with internal market. We'll try to see which are the relevant ones for transport. Aid having a social character granted to individual consumers, provided that such aid is granted without discrimination related to the origin of the products concerned. Typical example, you are granting an aid to those who buy an automobile because you want to have green energy, you want to have electric cars, you want to get rid of old polluting cars. So if you buy an electric car, you will receive a bonus, or a hybrid car, you will receive a bonus of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 euros. Now, this is an aid granted to consumers and obviously must not be discriminatory. Italy cannot say, oh, I will grant it only to those who buy Fiats, and France cannot grant them only to those who buy Renaults or Citroëns, and Germany cannot grant them only to those who buy Volkswagen, Mercedes, or BMW. It must be granted for, there must be no discrimination related to the origin of the products concerned. So, and it is given to consumers, it's not given to the producers. So you buy a car and you have a discount. So the system is very simply that instead the car, instead of costing, let's say 15,000 euros, it costs 11,000 euros. So you are spending less. Then we shall see how these 4,000 euros are somehow redistributed and go to the producer. But anyhow, it is the buyer, the consumer that has the advantage, that has this significant advantage. Or, well, damage caused by natural disasters, and well, this is quite obvious. And so this is paragraph 2. So there's not much that concerns transport, although we've seen now in Italy there's a whole lot of aid given to transport, individual transport, hybrid electric cars, electric bicycles, other forms of electric transport. So you have reduction some kind, but this is individual transport, which is not really the scope of our course. And then, so what we are more interested in this transport law class is paragraph 3, because it says that certain forms of state aid are compatible with the internal market may be considered. This means that there is a decision by the Commission may be considered to be compatible with the internal market, aid to promote the economic development of areas where the standard of living is abnormally low. So just we think of, clearly we're looking at regions which are disadvantaged. Or look at letter C, aid to facilitate the development of certain economic activities, and certain economic activities which could be connected to transport activities or of certain economic areas. So you see that A and C have a very important role in the development of transport services or transport infrastructures, mostly airports and railways, according to letters A and C of the Article 107. Then execution of an important project of common European interest, and I've already mentioned the corridor number 5 that should go under the Alps and that should join France to Eastern Europe and go from France to through Italy and then to Slovenia and then way towards the Central and East European countries. Then obviously promote culture and heritage conservation, very important, but not relevant here for transport. So here we have two aspects, letters A and C, which are significantly relevant for transport. So what is this article saying? These may be considered to be compatible. So you must justify, you say, I'm going to put money in a transport service or in a transport infrastructure, and therefore I'm going to finance it, but I must have some kind of green light from the Commission. It isn't automatic. Paragraph 2 says it is automatically authorized, but we've seen that this is not the case. Well, it could be the case of reduced tariffs, tickets for residents in distant regions. You are a Portuguese citizen and you are resident in the Azores and you have a reduced price for the airplane ticket. So that is state aid given to consumers. And so that's fine. So that is a case in which we will apply directly the state aid paragraph 2 of Article 107, but in most cases, and the cases which we will analyze now in the next lessons, are cases which fall under letters A and C of paragraph 3 of Article 107. Economic development of areas where the standard of living is abnormally low or serious underemployment, or development of certain economic activities or of certain economic areas where such aid does not adversely affect trading conditions. So these are two elements which are very important, and we shall see in a moment. Next week, we shall see what these cases are. Now, before concluding, there are two things. I forgot to say, when we were analyzing Assayag's case, that if you've noticed, we were talking not of a route, intra-European, intra-community route, but we are talking of an extra-community route. We are talking of routes of a route between Rome, New York, Paris, New York, Amsterdam, New York, and vice versa. And we were talking of an agreement which involved not partners. It wasn't Air France, KLM, and Alitalia that were finding an agreement. They were doing an agreement with Delta, with a foreign partner. Now, just to point out that this shows you the geographically expansive nature of European competition law. Our police will see it in the European Union competition law course, but just to show you that when we are applying these articles on competition, we are not necessarily looking only at the internal market. In this case, we had an issue that concerned routes that went outside the European Union, and we said, well, the Commission said, well, this is, we are going to apply, even if it concerns agreements with foreign non-EU partners and routes that provide services outside the European Union, they affect activity in the European Union, and therefore we will decide about it. So just to keep this is very important when we look at transport, because we know that transport is naturally international and goes well beyond the borders of the European Union. The second element that point I wanted to make is this. I would like to assign some cases for next week, because next week we're going to finish the air transport sector. So what I would ask our police, because this is a typical issue of mergers. If you can present next week case number 5, Aer Lingus versus Commission. This is the decision in which Ryanair wants to buy Aer Lingus, and the Commission says no, you cannot buy, you cannot merge with Aer Lingus. Aer Lingus is the Irish airline. So it is a typical issue of merger, and we know that mergers are under the scrutiny of the Commission because they can be anti-competitive. And then I would ask, Asayag, have you ever been to Belgium? No. Well, anyhow, let's imagine that sort of, I'll suppose that as you're French, I would ask you to present next week case number 7, which is Ryanair versus Commission. And this is a fundamental decision in the development of low-cost airlines, because it is Ryanair versus Commission, and this is the decision that opens up the European market to low-cost airlines. It is a very important decision, and again, we've seen how the court, in this case, the Court of First Instance, have set certain rules and which are very important. And then finally, the third case is the Open Skies case, and I would ask Galea to do this, and this has to do with, again, with the international expansion of EU law concerning international transport. So that's case number 10. What I would do, however, just to what we could do, instead of having them, I would say that maybe our police, instead of presenting this case on Wednesday, if you could present it on Thursday, 29th. Asayag, if you can present, so a police, the Aer Lingus Ryanair case number 5 on Thursday, 29. Asayag, the Ryanair Charleroi airport decision on Friday, and instead Galea on Wednesday, not next week, but the following week, Wednesday, the 4th of November, case number 10, the Commission versus the Open Skies decision Commission versus Denmark. And that also is a very important case. So, I mean, I think these cases are, many of these cases, some are make you understand how the system works, and some are groundbreaking cases, as the Charleroi decision is groundbreaking. Also, the Commission versus Denmark, or the Open Skies decision is groundbreaking because it opens up the market of European market to air transport. So it is, they're both these, especially these last two cases are very important, while the Aer Lingus Ryanair case number 5, which our police will present, is, well, it does synergic with her studies of European competition law, because it shows how sort of mergers can somehow limit competition. So it has to do with competition law applied to transport law. Having said that, are there any questions for today's lesson? Yes, I think.
Do we have to do the same as we did this week, like this complete? Because it takes a lot of time, and I didn't know that we would have to do this every week.
Well, I mean, I don't say every week, but I mean, it's. I think that it's. I mean, it's preparing. I mean, it's somehow preparing better the sort of your knowledge of the matter. I mean, when you go into a case and you present the case, it's if you all the notions. I mean, when today I skipped a whole lot of slides on the issue of commitments because they were in your case. So you have. So I will send you the slides. I skipped 3 or 4 slides because in your presentation you had the whole idea of how these commitments work. Admittedly, your case was a pretty long case, but if you look at the case that you will be the Charleroi decision, you will see that it is, well, much shorter than the one you presented today, because today's decision, the one on the Alliance, well, it was over 20 pages. Yeah, we're already significantly smaller. And once you have understood the Charleroi case, you have understood the whole system of low-cost airlines, because it shows us why did Ryanair become #1 airline in Europe? And you see it through this case. It shows you how the system, the Ryanair, which is a very ingenious economic way of organizing air transport, when you have that, you sort of, you've understood it. We'll see. I mean, in air transport, the cases are groundbreaking, so we must analyze them. In other areas for rail transport, we will not so much analyze this, except we will analyze maybe the Altmark decision, which is, again, groundbreaking in the field of public service obligations and compensation for public service obligations. But we don't find so many decisions that are so important. So when it comes to air transport and to port services, well, we could easily skip the decisions. But just to point out that these decisions, I feel they're very important for you to get into the matter. Once you'll see that, once you've seen the Charleroi case, you sort of all that part of the program, you've understood it, because you know how the system works and how state aid and airports and airlines, the interaction between local authorities, airports, and low-cost airlines works, and how that is the system of Ryanair. So I would encourage you to do this presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Okay, then see you next week, midday, 12 o'clock on Horizon Zoom. And I'll be sending you over over the weekend, I'll be sending you the slides, and I hope. Sorry, I had a rather busy weekend preparing a report, and so but I hope to open very soon the channel, the YouTube channel, and to load the lessons for those who want to see something again. Okay. Good afternoon to everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.